and guarantees. We're pleased to welcome now Christopher Green. He's a law professor at Ole Miss. Hey, Professor, good to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
Well, the president has wasted no time in issuing a series of executive orders, starting with a few hours after he was sworn in. And, of course, no surprise, which has sort of become a rather regular occurrence in our country. Presidents issue executive orders, and then numerous different parties stand up and file lawsuits against them, and they sort of weave their way through our legal system. This is confusing for just the average citizen out there. You hear the argument, this is unconstitutional, then you hear the argument in favor of, no, this is fully within the right, the power vested to the executive branch. What can you tell us in general about that?
Yeah, so there's this wonderful Saturday Night Live cartoon from I guess it's maybe 10 years ago or even more, and it's what it is. It's a parody of the Schoolhouse Rock how a bill becomes a law.
Yeah.
So they, I'm just a bill. I'm just on Capitol Hill. So the thing from the 1970s talks about all that stuff, and then the Saturday Night Live one, said, I'm an executive order, and I pretty much just happen. But the reason, and then he kicks the statute kicks the bill down the Capitol steps. But basically, we've got a bunch of statutes that give authority. So sometimes the authority is given to an administrative agency. Sometimes the authority is just given to the president. The president can decide certain stuff. And sometimes it's just a statute that there's an argument that maybe there's some implicit executive discretion. So all of our criminal laws, the prosecutors do not have to enforce them. And the president and the attorney general and the U.S. attorneys and all the apparatus get to decide. They get to pick and choose which of these they're going to go for. So all of these executive orders, they can be in any one of those buckets. They might be something where the president gets discretion, and it's just exercising just straightforward discretion given under statute to the president. It might be telling an agency what to do. And there's a bunch of questions about the extent to which the president can tell the agency what to do. Okay. And then it might be in the third bucket where the president says, well, implicitly, some of the I think the most troubling of these have been some of the impoundment questions, which he really sounds kind of like James II, saying, well, you can pass the laws, but I just don't have to enforce them. And President Nixon tried that argument and got very specifically slapped down by Congress. So those are the three buckets. And then there's also the question, is any of this constitutional? So isn't Congress required to make decisions that are legislative? Isn't all of this basically lawmaking of a sort that is supposed to be Article 1, not Article 2? So those are, broadly speaking, what the kinds of things that can be going on with these orders.
It feels like, Professor, and this is kind of more of a political opinion, I guess, than it is just related to the legality of these actions, that because we have a divided Congress and we have this filibuster rule in the Senate, it's pretty hard to get stuff through the Congress to the president's desk for signature. I remember vividly going back to the President Obama administration. You remember his famous quip, I have a pen and a phone. He was talking about executive orders. The heck with you, Congress. I can't get anything through there. I lost in the midterms and all that sort of stuff. Put his agenda on ice essentially for the next 6 years from a legislative perspective, and all the governing was done in the bureaucracies, the agency complex, by virtue of executive order. It just seems like we're playing ping pong back and forth.
Yeah, well, so when Obama made that speech, he was trying to get people to kind of do what he would say because he has this executive authority. But then once those things get into the courts and the courts say, oh, the only reason you did this is because you couldn't convince enough of Congress to pass it, That's a really difficult thing to have in the record. So to the extent that Trump is explicitly saying, I would love to have a statute on this, and Congress is perfectly capable of passing a statute on this. There's no emergency, there's no secrets at stake, but I'm just going to do what I think should be a statute as an executive order. Whoa. I mean, that is causing trouble for the long-term viability of that order. So that I got a pen and a phone thing. The reason we have to have an executive of some sort is because of emergencies and secrets. So
sure.
For him to say like, oh, we've got to have tariffs on all the Canadian stuff because they're suddenly not playing ball on X, Y, or Z. Well, that's one kind of argument. Or Colombia, they wouldn't let this plane land, so we gotta have tariffs on them. Oh, okay. He would know, and you can't just wait for Congress to authorize, sanctions on Colombia or sanctions on Russia based on like the things that happened 2 minutes ago. But hey, I've got this idea that this 1898 Wong Kim Ark case is overreads the birthright citizenship provision. That was 127 years ago. So the argument that I've got some emergency, I've got to do it right now, it's got to be just the executive, it can't be subject to judicial review or anything. Well, that's absurd when you're talking about something with that long a time lag. But some of these really are. There's money that's getting spent that might be inflaming adversaries. Money getting spent. It's going to affect how the Gaza situation plays out, things like that. There's a reasonable argument that there is an emergency.
So what about birthright citizenship? That's one of the first things the president signed an executive order on. This is controversial from a legal perspective, Professor. What's your view on that one?
Yeah, well, so the president, of course, obviously we have a huge number of folks who are subject to deportation kind of uncontroversially, people born outside the U.S. There are some other people who might be deportable based on whether this legal theory gets accepted. So basically the idea is, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to their jurisdiction are citizens of the United States. So there has been, really since 1866, since this got adopted by Congress, approved by the states, there's been questions about exactly what subject to their jurisdiction refers to. So in 1898, there was a child of a permanent visitor to the U.S., and the Supreme Court deemed this fellow Wong Kim Ark to be a citizen of the United States, to have birthright citizenship. But there have been some people who say, well, if you're the child of more temporary visitors or people who come illegally, that wouldn't apply to them. So this executive order takes both of those categories and says they are not citizens. There are a bunch of statutes that arguably conflict with that executive order too. So all of this is getting litigated. One question you always have when they challenge things in the courts is, does this actually matter yet? Do you have anybody with standing? So a bunch of states, they line up, and so under Democratic administrations, they line up. They usually go to particular places. There's a division in. So there's these districts, these federal district courts, and then they have individual chunks of them called divisions, and there's divisions with just one judge. So you can file, and you know exactly what judge you're going to get. So under Democratic administrations, all the Republican states run to Texas, to this one division. Now I think the thing for the Democratic states to do is to run to Massachusetts, where you're going to get a district judge that you're highly likely to like, and you're going to get appeals up to the First Circuit, which is going to be a friendly circuit. So the states they've got kind of machines up and running, and they always have some kind of story to tell about how this order is hurting them. And like, we can't, we don't know who to put in our driver's license database.
Oh, man.
A lot of those arguments have been not as good lately. So what you want to find, if you're, the state of Massachusetts, say, and you want to sue in the federal district courts in Massachusetts, you want to find somebody who is expecting a child tomorrow or something, or like waiting to induce labor and trying to decide, do I induce it this week or do I have to go up to Canada to induce labor or something? Somebody
Hold your thought there, Professor. We got a break on us. If you can hang around, we can talk about some of these other issues as well. We got law professor Christopher Green. We're coming right back. We're enjoying our discussion with law professor Christopher Green from the Ole Miss Law School. So, Professor, the birthright citizenship deal, your explanation was fantastic. It still seems to be up in the air, right? We don't know. Their lawsuits, I believe, have already been filed against this action by the president. Or is the Supreme Court ultimately going to have to rule on this?
It seems likely that they will eventually, and there's a bunch of questions about how quickly. So there's questions about how quickly they would have to, or how quickly they would want to. If you had, some kind of pending deportation decision, some piece of money that would either go out or not go out, so some kind of tangible decision that had to be made either way. And somebody, went into court and said, "Hey, make that thing not happen because of what this executive order says, or make it happen because of what this executive order said." And then they went through the court system. You could get something to the Supreme Court right away. So they have kind of their main docket where they have oral argument. We wait until the end of June for all that stuff. And then they have the emergency docket for deciding whether things happen. And it's conceivable. Depending on the situation, you could get something to this other docket. They call it the shadow docket, but it's perfectly open what they're doing. It's just they do it quickly. It doesn't seem too likely that this is going to suddenly get decided on the shadow docket. There are other issues about like the impoundment or the Humphreys executor. That's about whether the president can fire people. Those might get up to the Supreme Court on that shadow docket. This, I think they're probably going to want to take a while. If all the lower courts decide, Wong Kim Ark decides this, it's no good, they might just try to duck it. Something this important and this prominent to the administration, I think the court is probably going to want to weigh in. But they might just want not to antagonize the president. So they might, but standing by and letting lower courts antagonize the president, that's likely, I think, to be just as annoying as directly saying, we think birthright citizenship is what was in principle, what was expressed in the text in 1868. So, but all the law professors, there's a lot of ferment, and we're like, they're finally gonna cite our stuff, and they're finally gonna dig in through and see what Senator Conness said in 1866 and all that stuff. Conness is one of the guys I rely on in some of my work. So not for this issue, but he's got this one thing. He says to be a citizen is to get equal rights with all the other citizens. At the same time, he's saying that certain groups of people, about being subject both to the U.S. and to the authority of the Chinese emperor because they're Chinese subjects. So I'm excited that they may get some dirt under their fingernails in terms of the history, but they'll not right away, not next week, but
so
probably by
orders,
the end of 2026.
Several orders, as you well know, related to the immigration issue. This was a hot topic during the campaign. The president ran on that. He promised to gain control of immigration. He pointed to what he viewed as failures of the prior administration to secure the borders, designating cartels as terrorist organizations. Is that something that a president could do, in your view, through an executive order? This looks like it's going to be challenged as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of the foreign policy delegations are written in very open-ended terms. So, right after 9/11, we passed this authorization for the use of force about the entities that planned or helped out with 9/11, and then years later, there's this question: well, is ISIS that kind of entity? Okay, well, this you do have this authority to act against terror groups. And some of these cartels, the way they behave, they certainly like to frighten people. They sometimes attack non-combatants. They're not an army, right? It's not a complete mismatch. And they're they threaten the security of the U.S. No question about that. They're not, they're not flying planes into the Trade Center, but they're putting poison on our streets, and there's a body count that's really bigger than 9/11 if you count up all the fentanyl deaths and everything. So it's not a completely wild argument. If you just look through the statutes, they're written very broadly. Just generally speaking, Congress is like, Mr. President, please just take care of the problems. And the president's like, okay, I'll define the problems how I want. So that's why the pen and the phone authority really is huge.
And there's been a lot of reliance by presidents, as you well know, through the years on laws that many of us didn't even know were passed decades ago, such as I think it was a 1953 law that President Joe Biden used to prohibit drilling in offshore waters. He pointed to some old law. I say old because it was passed 70 years ago. And then the new president comes in and reverses all that. I'm not sure if any law was relied upon. It just feels like we're playing executive order ping pong. And I think most people in this country would say, hey, as long as they're issuing executive orders that I like, I'm good to go. But when they start issuing executive orders I don't like, well, I want somebody to rein them in. What's the end game here?
Yeah, I really want Congress to get in the game, and if they like these, they should pass a statute putting that rule into law. In part because you don't want the next guy to be able to reverse it. But but look back at the national parks started out. Teddy Roosevelt said, so they look at Niagara Falls and like, oh my goodness, Niagara Falls has become this over-commercialized, terrible situation. We need to go out west and like the Grand Canyon. We don't want the Grand Canyon to turn into Niagara Falls. So he's like, what statutes do I have that I can use? He's got this authority to declare monuments. So like the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone are now monuments. And you look at the statute like, well, I mean, it's it kind of fits. And eventually, we get some statutes on these things, but that's not the way to run a railroad. You want Congress to do their job. And I'm just saying, look, if it's not an emergency, if it's not something where you need secrecy, such that the president is really how you want to be negotiating the deal, you should pass this in a statute. And we pass emergency authorizations every year. We have Congress has to authorize the Army every 2 years. That's in the Constitution. Right. And they could just have an omnibus. Okay, all the regulations, all the executive orders that we like, and they have to authorize it. They could list them. There's no shortage of paper for that kind of thing. They could pass a statute like that, but they, with it's closely divided and the filibuster rule and all that, they don't. But if they were forced to, I think they could. I mean, I think they would really. But it's, I think people who like the substance of the executive orders should always be thinking, well, so we need some more wincing about the method, some more concern about procedure and not just the substance. The procedure matters a lot. That's largely what the rule of law is about, is using the right procedures and having the right people authorize things. And I hope that when the president has these executive orders, he uses that in part as leverage to get the kind of statutes that really should be governing, so that we can have a law that's actually enforced.
Well, it's a good point. Both leaders in both sides now, of course, in the control of the Republicans, under the control of the Republicans, both have indicated publicly, we want to try to get some of these orders codified into law. I mean, abortion is an issue, as you well know, Professor. If the Democrats had the trifecta legislatively, their top goal is to codify the right to an abortion into law, which, if I'm not mistaken, sort of just nullifies what the Supreme Court did with respect to Roe v. Wade, because that was based on the fact that we didn't have a law, essentially, to permit abortion. Is that right?
If it's within the Section 5 authority. So the Section 5 authority under the 14th Amendment, Congress gets to enforce the requirements that are put on states under Section 1, which is what Roe v. Wade was about.
Okay.
In the Civil Rights Act of 1964, one of the things, it didn't make the big headlines, but one of the things Congress did was codify Brown versus Board of Education. So in 1954, a bunch of people said, "Oh, what are all these courts going out? We got unelected judiciary doing stuff." Well, within 10 years, Congress said, "We agree with that." So Congress has authority. It's disputed, and there's the old case from 1997 called Bernie that I'm a critic of it, but there's arguments that Congress has more authority to clarify the law than Bernie allows. But Congress could certainly get in the game and pass some statutes disagreeing with what the Supreme Court has done, or agreeing and codifying it. And I think our situation would be a lot better if they did that kind of thing, both with the president and with what the Supreme Court has been up to.
Thanks for joining us, Professor. Always enjoy your insight and commentary. See you again, sir. Thank you.
Good to see you. Take care.
We're coming right back in the Element Well studio.